Oh, Brecht would love that you could see the microphone right now. Let's talk about Brecht, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to my Stage YouTube channel. If you're meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I am an independent theatre critic and a content creator based here in the UK, and you are watching this video because I recently went to go and see a new production of the Bertolt Brecht play The Caucasian Chalk Circle, which is being produced by the Rose Theatre in Kingston. And many of you will likely have heard about this because it is starring musical theatre actress and YouTuber Carrie Fletcher. Fan favourite, enormous talent. So I've enjoyed so many of Carrie Fletcher's performances recently in shows like Witches of Eastwick in Concert and Treason, both of which I reviewed in videos here on my channel, so you can go and watch those if you haven't already. As soon as I heard that she was going to be starring in her first ever play, that is to say, not a musical theatre performance, I knew I had to get tickets, so I was so excited to be invited to review this production. And I was really excited for her as well to be taking on this dramatic role. Now this is, full disclosure, a play that still involves music, so it is still utilising her very formidable skill set, but it is challenging her in new dramatic ways that she hasn't really had the chance to explore before, because even a musical with some of the best books in the world, with the exception of a few really well written ones, don't quite have the same mileage for character exploration and depth that a play does, or that a particularly rich play does. So even though she is singing in this show, this is very much a new challenge for her. At the same time as being really excited about this, I was also slightly nervous for all of Carrie Fletcher's fans who have been to support her and been to see her in so many shows that they would potentially be buying tickets just to go and support her to go and see Brecht. Now, Brecht is an acquired taste. We're going to talk a little bit more about this famous theatre maker and this famous theatrical style. If you've heard me refer to things as being very Brechtian before in videos, then that is because of this dude. We're going to talk about him some more today, as well as reviewing this specific production. So stay tuned, I'm going to discuss all of it, what I thought about Carrie's performance, what I think about this revival, what I think about Brecht in general, all coming in today's review. Now before I really get into it, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure you have subscribed to my Stage YouTube channel. I make content like this all of the time. If this kind of analytical deep dive on theatre production seems like the kind of thing that you would be into here on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed. I do also make a lot of lighter content as well, like weekly vlogs following me around theatres and updates on news and gossip and drama, like some previous shows that Carrie Fletcher has been involved with. I'm not saying the name, I'm not doing it. Also, make sure you're following me on other social media platforms. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, I'm on TikTok, all at Mickey Joe Theatre, and I post slightly different content on all of those. So to get the full theatrical experience, make sure you go find me. Now let's talk about The Caucasian Chalk Circle. So this is a slightly challenging question to answer, but we basically have this framing device at the beginning of the play where you have these refugees in this temporary housing situation who are waiting to be relocated, all from slightly different backgrounds and potentially from different classes, and you begin to find out that there is division between them and they all have slightly different perspectives and they do not necessarily get on well as a group. And there is a theatre maker coming in to perform some theatre with them and kind of build cohesion and understanding, and that theatre maker is going to get them to perform The Caucasian Chalk Circle. After we go into the thing, we don't actually revisit that as a framing concept, mainly because we don't have the time, because the Caucasian Chalk Circle narrative is so very long. So then the theatrical story that we go to is this kind of ancient parable, and it occurs during a feudal insurrection and a kingdom is dissolved. The wealthy ruler of that kingdom and his wife are forced to flee from the palace that they live in, lest they be killed in the uprising. And in that process, out of fear for her own life and a heavy helping of vanity, his wife abandons their child, this baby who is the heir to the throne, and you have a servant named Grusha who hides the child so he is not found by the rebels, and then eventually decides against her better judgment to take him with her and try and get him to safety. One thing leads to another, and she ends up single-handedly carrying him across this epic voyage through many challenges, through many different encounters that represent different things within society, and she is trying to rescue this baby and get him to safety. And this is what comprises much of the first act of the show. We see her sacrificing various aspirations that she has had and various comforts and various freedoms in order to provide for this child, and she ends up raising it, and this takes place over a few years. Now this is going to get spoiler alert if you don't want to know what happens in this play. I'm about to tell you. Skip ahead to the next section if you don't want this part. So someone from the kingdom returns the child's mother, has come back to prominence and wants him to be returned to the palace, and there's this whole ensuing legal battle over the custody of the child. We then meet Azdak, who is going to be the judge presiding over this case, but we have a little bit of a backstory about Azdak to explain his unique perspective on the law. Now, he is this everyman who was appointed judge by the rebels who overthrew the sort of monarchy presiding over this city. They decided that he better represented them as a people because he had just finished breaking the law by accidentally housing a member of the aristocracy. And so his latent criminality gave him a better perspective on crime. And he was this judge that accepted bribes, but then in spite of that still dealt out punishments that would benefit the lowest in society, even when it wasn't necessarily legally fair to do so. All of this to build towards this moral message and parable, which is, in terms of custody for the child, he devises, after he's heard both sides of the case, that a chalk circle should be drawn, the child placed in the middle, and each prospective mother should try and pull on the child's arms, and whoever can pull him out of the circle wins. Now, each time they attempt this, Grusha can't bring herself to harm the child or tear the child in two, so gives up and lets him be pulled to the other side. This is exactly what Azdak was hoping to achieve, and awards custody to Grusha because she does not want the child to come to harm. Now, if we go back to the framing device for this whole thing, you have these two different men who are in this sort of a land dispute about how land is to be used in this resettlement and this reallocation of their community, basically. And they each want different things for the land, but the implication is that they will tear it in two if they can't come together and be unified. So that's the Caucasian chalk circle, and it's a lot of plot, and there's so many little minor plot points and tangents that I didn't even get onto explaining, and so many other characters that we meet, but it's about as long as it sounds. And the way that they do it in this production is the first act, which is an hour and a half, follows all the way up to Grusha receives this court summons and the child is taken away from her again. So we have this whole epic journey. It's very intense, very heavy, very serious, and then we have an interval. The second act, comparatively much shorter. I think it's only about an hour, if that, not even that. And this is where we meet Azdak. Full bit of backstory. We don't see Carrie Fletcher as much. She has been there almost throughout the first act, but she is barely in the second until right at the end, and it all leads up to this final scene, which is the court case. Now, before I tell you what I thought of this particular version, we need to talk a little bit more about Brecht. So if you have studied drama or acting before in any kind of a capacity, you will have heard of this theatre maker, incredibly influential 20th century German theatre maker, Bertolt Brecht, Bertie to his friends. Bit of a mad one, super Marxist, and had some very strong opinions about theatre. Now, Brecht, who also wrote the Threepenny Opera, is associated stylistically with a whole host of things designed to alienate the audience from being too immersed in the world of the story. He wanted a certain amount of emotional distancing, so the audience were aware at all times that what they were watching was a false representation, that they were seeing something staged and it wasn't wholly believable. So things like exposed lighting rigs, things like any kind of exposed stage technology, things like actors referring to themselves as their character in the third person and presenting a character. I will be playing this part, speaking to the audience and breaking that fourth wall. I was about to say third wall. That's the back of the set. They're just trashing the back of the set. That's not what I meant, but would also probably be very Brechtian, let's be honest. Anything that shatters the audience's immersion in this world, and you can probably think of a bunch of examples from shows that you've seen. Brecht would have loved Six because they do that all the time. That whole bit at the end of Six where they're like, what you've been watching this whole time is something that we devised and we've tricked you, but now we're being very open about it. That's very Brechty. So there's various stylistic features in this particular production that absolutely give the game away that what we're watching is a Brechtian piece of theatre. The announcement of chapters, the use of music but with musicians that you can see at all times. This sort of very bare, very exposed set that they use. It is transparently a piece of theatre. And the point of all of this is that it is supposed to increase the political potency of a particular piece of theatre because it's meant to force the audience to draw an opinion and to craft an opinion. It's not necessarily completely prescriptive. It encourages the audience to have a perspective on characters. You know, we don't necessarily have characters that are presented as entirely good, benevolent people. You're supposed to draw your own conclusions. But Brecht's theatre was always very socially conscious, very politically minded. It had a message, it had an agenda, and it wanted you to really think about it. This is not theatre for entertainment by any stretch of the imagination. That's not to say it's not entertaining, but it has a higher purpose. So all of this can come across a little bit disarming. And I feel like there are moments in this play where the tone is really well understood, and there are moments in this where it's not. And it's almost as neat as the division between the two acts, because the first act, and I'm going to talk more about Carrie's performance, but generally by her, is played just very earnestly, very sincerely, and it's this epic, challenging, emotionally arduous journey that she goes on with these very heavy moments. But there's these parts in the script that seem a little at odds with the seriousness of her situation because it's comic and you have these characters who behave sort of buffoonishly because they're caricatures, really. They're not meant to be realistic people. They are these moral absolutes to represent certain ideals. And so it's a little bit at odds with the sincerity that that first act is conducted with. By the time we meet Jonathan Slinger's character as Dak the Judge in the second act, the whole balance of the tone feels a lot better understood. This sort of duality of its seriousness and its comic elements. And a big part of that is that Jonathan Slinger understands the irony with which Brecht should be performed. If there's humour, it's tongue-in-cheek and it's laughing at society and don't people behave in a ridiculous way, and isn't legal infrastructure and all of these things laughable because of all of its flaws. You know, it's not laugh out loud comedy, it's early political satire as we would understand it. So let me talk a little bit more about specifically what I do and don't enjoy about this production, and let me tell you how many stars I ended up giving it. So my enjoyment of this production varied very much between the two acts. I did feel like in the first act it wasn't completely tonally comfortable. I didn't feel that all of the actors were necessarily on the same page with the tone with which they were meant to be performing, or that I as an audience member was able to understand the tone that anyone was going for. You know, because Carrie's character, Grusha, was taking everything very, very seriously, and you had these clowns surrounding her, and it didn't really work for me. It was very much a 3-star act, and it was an hour and a half long, so it was a decent slog as well. There was some interesting staging in there was some really visually striking moments, and there were some really stirring things, and there were some really funny things. It was just the juxtaposition of them made them each harder to enjoy, because the whole thing was neither completely sincere nor really comfortable being comic. Cut to the second act, where the introduction of Jonathan Slinger made all the difference, simply because he seemed to understand Brecht and its tonality so well. The whole thing just made more sense because of his capabilities, essentially. And that I would have given a 4-star review. It was a 3-star first act and a 4-star second act. Now on balance and on average, just because the first act is so much longer, it takes the majority and it ends up being a strong 3-star adaptation of this play that I really ended up enjoying. If only because it really made me think and it really challenged me as a theatre goer. And I've had to really consider my response to it in a lot of this review, which is something that doesn't necessarily happen very often, so I enjoyed it from that perspective. And it ends for me a lot better than it starts. You know, by the end of the show, rather than in the interval, I was thinking, oh, I actually enjoyed that, perhaps a lot more than I was expecting to, but when you've had an hour and a half of a first act that you're struggling with a little bit more, can it be completely redeemed by a stronger second act? I might be inclined to question where they put the interval here. Now, in terms of the structure of the plot, it does make sense to a certain extent, but like I said, it's a really long first act before we can get into the ultimately more rewarding parts of the show. I really enjoyed the use of music. I thought it was very stirring. You know, lyrically not necessarily the most powerful because we were adapting script with music, but I did think that it suited each scene very well and it sort of extended the emotion at each time, which only really served to make the whole thing more stirring and more dramatic in that first act and more sincere, and again, slightly at odds with the sort of twisted humour of it all. I enjoyed the costuming. There was occasional, very clever and very whimsical use of props, and I kind of wish that whimsicality had gone even further. She has this little teddy bear that represents the baby. It gets slightly bigger every time that it appears until eventually it is a child in a teddy bear onesie holding the teddy bear. That's a really nice touch. I think there was scope to have even more wit with the props and with the costuming, because again, some people are costumed in this just very traditional way. Some people are costumed in a very humorous way, like the guards who are chasing her. It kind of undermines their seriousness as characters, which is fine, but then she's behaving as somebody would when, you know, being chased for their life, fleeing an insurrection in a war-torn city. Which again is maybe exactly what they were going for, this sort of unbalanced tonality throughout the whole thing. It just left me a little bit uncomfortable as an audience member because you don't know where you're supposed to fall. It's nice to have the mood prescribed slightly more. Maybe it does make audiences work harder. Maybe I'm being too lazy as an audience member. Let me know your thoughts about this. So I've talked about the show, but so much of what I want to talk about here is these two performances from Carrie Fletcher and Jonathan Slinger in the first and the second acts respectively. So I'm going to talk about that next. So Carrie is really, really great here. She is so committed, she is so in the moment. She plays maternal so well. I was saying afterwards that for as much as I've loved watching all of her performances up to this point, I'm really enjoying the roles she is now aging into, and I think she is entering the best years, or what are going to be the best years of her career, because as much as I enjoyed her as an ingenue, I don't think she was ever necessarily the most obvious fit for it, because she's always been slightly too knowing, and she has these other characteristics and other qualities about her. She has never been as simple as this doe-eyed young thing, and now that she is playing these older roles, these maternal characters, it brings out such a brilliant side of her. Her connection towards this baby who is eventually her child is so real and so intense and grounds the whole thing in this real emotional honesty. Her desperation, her commitment, her rage at parts of this are brilliant. She sings fantastically, of course, and she is so expressive through her singing. I saw something in her vocal performance in this show that I've never quite noticed before that reminded me of Maria Friedman. There are a few musical theatre performers I think are more expressive through a lyric and really utilise that as well as Maria Friedman does, and I really saw that in Carrie Fletcher, and I think she is the heir apparent to that particular trait. But I do think there is scope for her to be even more expressive in her spoken dialogue to compare with her vocal performances. I think that power and that intensity and that ferocity and that wistfulness that she can have in her singing, all of those traits and all of those emotions are available to her when she is speaking dialogue. I just don't think she necessarily realises she can access them as intensely, because there's like a high level she kicks into when she's singing, and she can act with that same level of passion without necessarily singing. Oh my god, hey, if you're halfway through this video wondering why the sound just improved dramatically, it's because my microphone wasn't turned on. I apologise for that, but there's really nothing I can do about it now. Now, the other star of this play is Jonathan Slinger. Now, Jonathan is a very well-respected and very illustrious classical actor who has done Shakespeare, who has done Chaucer, who has done all of these incredible things. I have seen him perform in a few musicals as well, because that's what I usually tend to go and see. So I saw him in Urinetown as Officer Lockstock a few years back when that was at the St James Theatre, which is now the Other Palace. And he was also one of the replacement Willy Wonkers in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory at Theatre Royal Drury Lane. And he's really remarkable in this. Like I said a little bit earlier, he understands the irony with which Brecht needs to be performed. He has this seriousness, but he has this comic side about him as well, and he can illustrate the satire of what it all is. He finds the importance in each of his lines. There's this knowing delivery of it that plays to his fellow actors as well as playing to the audience. And he does craft this multi-layered, complex performance that is not necessarily giving you just, I am this wholesome, upright character that you are expected to like. He's quite difficult to pin down in terms of his own morality. He is likable in one instant, and then you question a lot of his decisions. He's this very real, very honest, very imperfect characterization. So who would I recommend this particular production to? This is a really interesting question. I think it's a lot more accessible than perhaps I've made it seem. You know, the script is a new adaptation of the Brecht. It is modernized. It is not Shakespearean era dialogue. You're going to be able to understand everything that's happening, and it asks you to explore moral questions. It gives you the kind of narratives that you are familiar with, like this very obvious moral story, and then it gives you another take on that which is slightly more challenging to form an opinion of. I think if you're looking for something thought-provoking, if you're looking for something that you want to see with someone else and then discuss afterwards, this is exactly that kind of piece of theatre. This challenged me a lot more than some of the other plays that I've been to see recently. I do think that fans of Carrie Hope Fletcher will be very satisfied by this production. You know, she sings a lot. She is incredibly well utilized in the first act of the show. She barely leaves the stage for the duration of that. It really explores all of the different facets of her skill set, and she gets to give a really strong performance because of that. I also think she has an entire subsection of fans who particularly enjoy her writing and that side of her, who have aged with her. And I think if that's you, then you particularly will enjoy this production. I think there's lots for you to like about this. But those are my thoughts on the Caucasian Chalk Circle at the Rose Theatre in Kingston. If you've seen this production, let me know what you thought about it in the comment section down below. There is so much scope for discussion of this. Let me know what your takes were, what you enjoyed, what you maybe weren't so sure about with this production. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stager YouTube channel for plenty more content just like this coming very soon. Also, if there is a particular show you would like me to review that I haven't yet on my channel, let me know about that in the comment section down below as well. If you really enjoyed today's video, you can give me a super thanks down below. That would be very helpful to me as a Stager content creator, or you can go to patreon.com/MickeyJoeTheatre, where you can gain access to some exclusive photo and video content. If you would like to read some more of my written reviews, you can use the link down in the description below to go to showscore.com and sign up for an account. You will automatically be following me and my critic profile to see all the reviews that I've posted for different websites, including whatsonstage.com. And you'll also be able to review shows on there for yourself. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day. For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey. Thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!